Hello there, and welcome to this episode of A Language I Love Is, which happens to be the finale of Series 2. Yes, indeed, the show that's all about languages, linguistics and love has reached the finish line of another series, and to mark the occasion, my very humble podcast is hosting a giant in the world of linguistic communication. My guest for this episode is Dr. Lauren Gawne, a researcher and senior lecturer at Australia's La Trobe University, but she is also, and I dare say better known as, one of the co-hosts of the hit linguistic podcast Lingthusiasm. I was delighted that Lauren was keen to come on A Language I Love Is, and it was a privilege to give her the audio opportunity to be publicly passionate about one particular Tibeto-Burman language, namely Yolmo.
देखो आज जिल्ला पहिला न देखो ठाउँ-ठाउँलाई हेनले माउरी टेङ्गुरु हेन्डु फेउडु हेन्डुबा याबुदु लाति लाखोइ ओले ओ दिखोइ लागि याबुकी माइबा लसना आज याबुकी माइबा नि नाता म ओदि इन्टरनेट क्याला ओदि क्याला लुदि तेनतेरके याबु लाखोइ ओले ओये ओखो याबु ए ओनले थ्यांक यू ओचे लाति
So, I am really thrilled for this final episode of the second series of A Language I Love Is I have an all-star guest. Not that my previous guests were not stars, but in the realm of linguistic podcast, this is a real treat. My guest today is Dr. Lauren Gawne. Now, in the day job, she is a senior lecturer at La Trobe University in Melbourne, but she might be known to many people online even better as one of the co-hosts and co-creators of Lingthusiasm, the incredible linguistic podcast, which, if you haven't listened to it, why are you listening to my show? Go listen to Lingthusiasm. It's incredible general linguistics presented in a really accessible manner. So this is just, I'm thrilled. I'm trying not to be too starstruck. I'm keeping it under control. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you? How are things with you today?
Thanks, Daddy. It's so lovely to be here, and it is absolutely not lost on me how delightful it is that your season finale has a cliffhanger, because Yolmo is a mountain language spoken across the Himalayas. So I'm so excited to get to be here and just get to talk about Yolmo.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I think we're off to a good start with a good pun already. I appreciate that. That thought had not crossed my mind. A literal cliffhanger. I'm really pleased that we were talking before the show and how I didn't really want to bother you and Gretchen McCulloch, your co-host, too much. You are the doyens, the senior podcasters, and it's just such a treat. But if anything, the way I made myself feel better about this was that on Lingthusiasm, you keep it very general. You talk about general linguistic topics to introduce them to your audience, which is wonderful. And the way I justified the invitation to come on my very humble podcast was that you get to talk about yourself and a language that you wouldn't otherwise get the space to do. So you mentioned the language there. Could you, in perhaps one sentence, introduce this language that you love for us?
Sure. Yolmo is a Tibeto-Burman language that is spoken in Nepal. I was very cheeky in choosing this language because there is a main group of speakers in the Malamchi Valley area, but there are also independent diaspora groups that live across Nepal. And it's mostly those groups that I have spent a lot of time working with and know really well. And some of them are known as Yolmo, some of them are known by other names, but this was a way for me to kind of sneak 2 or 3 languages I love into talking about a single language. And I think one of the things I love about this is it shows that what is a language is a complicated mix of linguistic and social and historical factors.
Absolutely brilliant. No, you are more than welcome to sneak multiple languages into this show. It means more linguistic context. And I mean, for crying out loud, we had a whole episode about Proto-Germanic, which, let's face it, was a chance to just talk about the entire Germanic family. So it's all welcome. So I'd like to expand on what you just briefly sketched out there. The sort of the linguistic landscape of Nepal. The geographical landscape, I think, will be quite familiar to people. It's a very mountainous part of the world, the roof of the world, as it's been called. Could you tell us about the languages of Nepal? How does Yolmo fit in beside other languages and languages that might be better known and have more speakers?
Absolutely. So Nepal, it runs like along the Himalaya. And so you get people who live in flatlands, but also people who live in hills and people who live in some of the tallest mountain areas in the world. And Nepal has around 120, there's 123 recognized languages in Nepal. And they are a combination of kind of 40%, 60%, with 40% Indo-Aryan languages. Nepali is the largest of those languages. It is the main language for many people, but also for speakers of those other 122 languages. It is the main language of education in primary and secondary school. It's the main language of commerce. It's very closely related to Hindi. People who grow up speaking Nepali and watch a lot of Hindi TV can understand what's happening in Hindi. They're very confused that I can't. As a very late life learning Nepali speaker, I have a lot of fondness for Nepali. It's really a really great Indo-Aryan language, but because it's been exposed to that other 60% odd of the Tibeto-Burman languages across Nepal, it has some very interesting exposure features. Those Tibeto-Burman languages come from a massive range of different families within Tibeto-Burman. That's a language family that has around 450 languages in it. As the name suggests, languages from the Tibetan region are languages like Burmese, and many languages across Nepal, India, Northeast India, Bhutan, all the way down into the Myanmar area. So that's a really large language family. That family is generally considered to be in the Sino-Tibetan family, so you throw in another couple of dozen Sinitic languages. I am not a historical linguist, and my confidence about how well Sino-Tibeto-Burman as a family can be reconstructed is not. People have spent a lot of time writing very long books and having very big debates about it. It's very much not my wheelhouse, but they are generally considered to be part of a larger, deeper linguistic family. Also, just a quick shout out to Kasunda, which is a language isolate in Nepal as well.
Good stuff. I did not know that about Kasunda. Fantastic. You mentioned there then that this is a huge language family. Would it be fair to put Sino-Tibetan on a par with, say, Indo-European in like a massive language family with tremendous diversity? So these different languages, speakers there'll be some things in common, but it's not going to be very recognizable, say, Burmese and Yolmo.
Absolutely. I mean, even Burmese and Tibetan, you're looking at really having to have a deep reconstructed knowledge of that, and Jim Matisoff's team for many, many years worked on recreating that family. So they're very not mutually intelligible. I work with the Yolmo languages, and they are from the Tibetic part of the Tibeto-Burman family. So there's lots of cognates with Standard Tibetan, which is spoken in Lhasa and is kind of the language of Tibetan print media and spoken media. I recognize a lot of cognates, but they are quite distinct languages. I can't understand casually spoken Tibetan.
But do you think that Yolmo speakers could? Is it a daily language for them?
One of my Yolmo friends was doing Tibetan classes, and for her that was partly about learning to read and write in Tibetan, which has as complicated a writing system as English in terms of it's about 500 years old, and there are all these consonant clusters that just reduce down to a single sound that give you a really good idea of the historical reflexes of the language. And it means that there are people who speak like Ladakhi and Tibetan, and those languages are not mutually intelligible, but both can be reconstructed from the older written forms, because these written forms just have so much complicated. It's just like if you see this consonant cluster, it sounds like this in Standard Tibetan and this in Ladakhi, but like those two forms end up not being cognate for modern speakers of the language. I think Yolmo speakers would find it quite easy to learn Tibetan, whether it would be immediately available to them. not quite. It's a bit like Romance languages. Like if you collect one and you collect a few and then you can start squinting and having a crack.
Right, understood. It's that sort of relationship. It takes effort. Tibetan wouldn't come naturally to Yolmo speakers. You said your friend is taking classes there. That instantly says a bit more different.
Yeah.
Understood. And I'm also thinking specifically about the geopolitics of this region. It's quite complicated in terms of borders. Obviously, we have very controversial borders in this part of the world. Would it be that speakers of Yolmo in Nepal don't actually have much to do with speakers of Tibetan because you've got a pretty firm border there, the border of China?
The border has historically been quite porous. So Yolmo speakers are originally in Nepal from around 400 or 500 years ago. They probably came over from Kirong, which is another related language that's quite mutually intelligible. There's some vowel differences that don't help there. Those Kirong speakers came around 400 or 500 years ago to establish a monastery in a Begul, which is like a hidden valley as part of Tibetan theology. And so those borders have historically been less geopolitically rigorous. There's some interesting, so like people in that original area where there's around, 5 to 10,000 Yolmo speakers still. I've worked with them less, but they seem to have higher rates of literacy in standard Tibetan script still. The communities I work with don't have that literacy so much anymore. And the orthographies they've created tend to be more in Devanagari, which is the writing system used for Nepali and Hindi, one with a line across the top. It's a very nice writing system. It doesn't quite fit the languages, but they make do with some creative reuse of characters. And so there's still a religious connection, but there is definitely less of that kind of migration for trade that there used to be. Obviously, modern geopolitics is making Tibetans, look more towards Beijing and central China. Yolmo speakers very much see themselves as Nepali, not in a way that's at odds. I think we have this habit of being like, oh, well, if you're Nepali, then you're Nepali, and if you're Tibetan, you're Tibetan. But I have this really nice paper that I wrote with some colleagues in anthropology, Gerald Roche, and history, Ruth Gamble, where we analysed song texts from Shuba, which is one of the Yolmo dialects I've worked with. And it was really nice to just see how people in song, through either the use of the song form or their use of language or their choice of topics, people are quite happy to see themselves as Shuba speakers, as Yolmo people, as Tibetans, and as Nepali. Those things aren't mutually exclusive in a way that outsiders who come in and try and categorize people might think of them as being.
Yes, I think as a researcher from Australia, which is a product of a certain European mindset, you might have to do a little bit of unthinking, actually, a little bit of deconstructing to fully appreciate these differences. You mentioned there about orthography, the way that the language is written down, and it sounds like it's quite fluid, it's quite unsettled. There seems to be room for personal invention. Is that fair to say? Is there no one standard orthography? And does that pose challenges for working with this language as a researcher?
Yolmo, in the areas I work in, like many of the world's languages, is first and foremost a language of oral communication in domestic environments and social environments. There were some Bible translators across the end of the 20th century with that larger Yolmo group who had an orthography, but apparently people weren't really happy with that orthography, so they've gone back to the drawing board. I've seen the Shuba speakers come together as a group and establish their own. They're a very driven group of people who are very committed to their language and bringing it into part of education for their children, which is super great. And it's been really fun to support them in recording stories and creating resources. They work together on an orthography they mostly agree on. So things are shifting. People also use kind of very ad hoc, their own creation orthographies to like type in English keyboards on their mobile phones. Yeah, coming from a language that has a long standardized written history, it is hard to get myself into the mindset of like, that's actually okay. And that's how most languages have operated for most of human history. It has posed some challenges for my work, but actually not that many in the area of, most things get done digital recording and I have my own transcription for my own use, and everything kind of works out.
Would this be the transcription used on the excellent Wikipedia entry for Yolmo, which I believe you had a hand in, let's say?
Yes, I think I used something that was a combination of my preference and some of the existing materials. Yes, one of the projects I had was to flesh out the Wikipedia page for the language, and I encourage anyone who works on language documentation or who's just interested in the world's languages, summarizing existing descriptive grammars in a way that is accessible for Wikipedia is a really valuable thing that you can do to make this work more accessible for more people.
Brilliant. Could you tell me a little bit about the current situation with Yolmo speakers? If it is not the majority language of the country, how is the vitality of Yolmo as a language? And do you have any predictions for the future? Is it hale and hearty, or is it actually suffering from encroachment from other languages?
I think this is one of those real area by area, family by family things. So my PhD research focused on speakers of Yolmo in Lumjung. I had originally planned to work with speakers of a language called Kagate, where there was some work in the 1970s. It pops up in Grierson's Linguistic Survey of India because there just happened to be some speakers of the language working in Darjeeling while that survey was happening. A truly bonkers, 30-year-long project to document the linguistic variety of India. It's this half a bookshelf long set of volumes and documents 350 languages with basic description and a bit of lexicon and a short translated story. So we knew this language existed. My PhD supervisor had a friend in Nepal, and he used to be a trekking guide. And before that, his father was a traveling Tibetan Lama, and he spent his childhood just going around all these different hill villages in Nepal. So I got to Nepal and he was he's worked with linguists for many, many years. So it was very, it was just okay, what language do you want to work with? I was well, in the literature, there's this language called Kagate, but supposedly in the 70s, there were fewer than 1,000 speakers. So I don't know. He just goes, yeah, I know someone. And I was just okay, it's day 3 here. This seems like things are going better than I had expected them to be going. We'll just see. We'll see. And so within a week, I was working with this woman where, we were recording and I was she's saying things that line up with what's in these 1970s publications about as much as you'd expect for a 40-year gap. Sure. Okay. Kagate was known to be spoken in the Rumachup district of Nepal. And so I found a map of Rumachup. And one day after we've been working together for a month or so, I was I have this map of Rumachup, where is your village? And she was just what? We're from Lumjung. I was okay. Now, this is one of those things where I look back now and I'm just oh, bless you, tiny child, where there was no report of Yolmo or Kagate being spoken in Lumjung. But it turns out, there's half a dozen villages, there's 500 to 700 people who speak that language and have been there for over a century. In the time that I was working on my PhD, I got to be put in touch with one of those original Kagate speakers from the 1970s paper who do live in Rumachup. They had changed their name to Shuba. Kagate was the outsider name. They changed their name to Shuba. There's still around 1,000 of them in Rumachup. And in Lumjung, what you find is that men will often go and work overseas for many years and women will move to more urban centres or closer to schools for their children or work for them. And people still speak the language, but they're much more keen on their children speaking Nepali and English and getting jobs. Some people still speak Yolmo with their children, absolutely. For the Shuba community, what you tend to find is that young people will go and work outside of their village for a year or 3 and then they'll come back and get married. And they're much more likely to stay in the village. They're much more likely to keep farming in their village. They don't have a lot of contact with, they have contact with outsiders and people bring a tractor full of rice to the bottom of the road they can get to, and roads are being built into the area. But generally people are much more present. They have a school in their village that is almost entirely, in primary school that's almost entirely for the Shuba-speaking children. And that community is much more organised around maintaining their language and cultural practices. They're much more driven to create this orthography. They've worked with NGOs to create a dictionary and other resources. I've created picture books for them. Like, they're much more interested in proactive management of their language. And that's not to say that one or the other approach is necessarily better. Like, people are just making the choices that are best for them and their family. But you can see how individual choices and community choices build up to what are probably going to end up being very different outcomes for these two different dialects.
I see, understood. So it's a complex picture that you're painting here, but then this is basically inevitable with the geography of the country, with these huge valleys that are separating people. It's going to be reflected in the languages. I just have a question, a very general question about the sounds of Yolmo. It belongs to, as you say, the Tibeto-Burman language family, and yet it exists at a linguistic, shall we say, liminal space. It exists sort of a linguistic crossroads. It's, the Himalayas are not only where two tectonic plates have met, it's also where two ginormous language families have met. Is that reflected in the phonology, the sounds of Yolmo, in that it might look a little bit like Tibeto-Burman in some aspects, and some aspects it might look quite Indo-Aryan?
That might be one reason why it is missing a vowel that I love, what we find in Kirung and other languages of the area, which is the front-rounded U vowel. That's possibly a language contact effect. It still sounds very Tibetic. The phonology hasn't been impacted that much. If anything, I'd say hanging out with a whole bunch of Tibeto-Burman languages has given Nepali a little bit of a Sino-Tibetan complex. So Nepali has a reported speech particle, re, which is for, I didn't see this, but I've been told that something happened. And it has a form you can use to indicate a degree of surprise about something. So I always like to think about it in the context of, like, you can say your podcast is really good in Nepali, Taiko podcast ramrota. But you can also say Taiko podcast ramro reicha. And it's just like, oh, your podcast is really good, contra my expectations, which is always a weird kind of compliment to get. Yeah, I tend to notice, because kind of my focus is on Tibeto-Burman, my focus is on Yolmo first. I tend to notice the ways that Nepali appears influenced by Tibeto-Burman rather than the other way around necessarily. Yolmo, like many Tibetic languages, again, the family is massive and I can't say anything that would capture commonalities across the whole family. But Yolmo does have a tone system that I love. It's a two-tone system, and the tone is somewhat influenced by the initial onset of the first syllable. It's only on the first syllable. And so if a sound is voiced, it will always be low. If it's aspirated, it will always be high. And so when I have a word that's an unvoiced, unaspirated consonant or a vowel initial, I have to actually pay attention and figure out the tone. It's quite stressful because the tone tends to neutralize in strings of speech. So it is there, but it becomes much less pronounced. So in a sentence like, Ngaimin Lauren Yimba, my name is Lauren, that initial nga is low tone, I, or first person, and then nga is 5 with a high tone. So there's lots and lots of minimal pairs, but when you look at a recorded pitch track, those tend to be a bit less pronounced if they're not in isolation. And I have very patient friends who sit with me and we kind of develop this shorthand. I have one friend where we talk about things being a rice or a stone, because to is stone and to is rice, and they're words we use all the time. So I'll just like, oh, is that tone like this one or this one? I remember one time very early on with a person helping me with the language, I had this set of minimal pairs for tone, and they just never put these minimal pairs together before. They just thought it was the funniest.
Because they sounded so different.
Well, they sounded different, but they'd never kind of thought to put them next to each other and compare them in that way. That was a very entertaining day for everyone. She even dragged her son in the room. It was just like, listen to this. How funny is this?
The joys of linguistic fieldwork, yeah.
The tone neutralizing in speech, I'm very grateful to my colleague Amos Teo, who I had recorded some tone data, and then he was just like, I did the elementary error which is that both the participants had used list intonation, which is like really bad if you're a phonetician. So it was like you put it in a sentence and the sentence I use is I say something. And because say, it's verb final language, so it's I word say, but they were using list intonation. So it was like ngā tō se, ngā tō se, ngā tō se. And that intonation gets in the way of analysing the tone. So what we did was say we deliberately created this jamming interference of the list intonation to see just how much the tone was influenced by the surrounding intonation. It turns out quite a bit.
So, it's time for me to pose the first of my 3 questions to you, Lauren, which is, what is your story with this language? I think it's fair to presume that you don't have any sort of family connection to this language. This has come about through your personal studies as an academic. So, could you walk us through that relationship then and that story?
Sure. I didn't really know what linguistics was until I had a friend convince me I should do a first-year subject because she wanted to do it and it fit my timetable. So I said, sure. And I think by the end of week 3, I was just like furious at the world for having not told me about linguistics earlier. And so I did a 3-year undergraduate degree. In Australia, we have the option to do a 4th-year honours research project. I had a 3rd-year language and culture subject with Dr. Barbara Kelly at the University of Melbourne. And in that subject, we did a week on gesture. Again, I was just like, how have I got to 3rd year and no one's told me about this before? I didn't realise at the time that actually it was really unusual to get to be taught about gesture in an undergraduate curriculum. But she said if you were going to write on this topic, you had to come and speak to her personally because it's one of her favourite topics and she refused to read a bad assignment on it. So I did my assignment and I went to speak to her. I was like, I'm finding it a bit hard to understand these categories and like how they work. And she was like, yeah, I always thought that would be a good honours topic. It took me like a whole week to come back and be like, Barb, when you said that could be an honours topic, could I do that honours topic? Which for many years afterwards, she gave me a great deal of grief over. She was like, I would not have suggested it if I didn't want you to work on it. Took me a while, but I took the hint and I did an undergraduate research topic on how gestures are perceived by English speakers. I took a year off to see how an office job suited me. It suited me fine, except I was bored out of my brain. And so I had coffee with Barb and was like, I think I want to come back to graduate studies. I think I kind of want to work in this area. I'm not sure. She was like, yeah, look, your gesture topic sounds fine. It needs a bit of work. Go back, work on that. Or I've just started a big project with a bunch of colleagues looking at features of grammar that can show us something about the way people socially construct reality. And I've promised that I will bring along a PhD student who will work with a language in Nepal that has grammatical evidentiality. And we can pick up what that is maybe in your next question. And I was just like, well, Barb, now that you've told me that idea, like what am I honestly going to go away and come up with that is better than getting to do that project? I was like, do you think I'd be competitive for it? And once again, she had to be like, Lauren, I would not have suggested it if I did not think I wanted you to work on it. And so that is how in 2009, I found myself in Nepal, basically learning Nepali a week ahead of what I was trying to elicit in Yolmo. I'm very grateful to Asa and everyone in the Lamjung Yolmo community who put up with a very bewildered and bewildering graduate student me. That project was an absolute joy, and then getting to know the Shuba speakers and continue working with them. And since then, I've also gone to visit speakers of Yolmo who live in Ilam, which is all the way over near India in the beautiful tea fields of Ilam. Has just been kind of that the plan was to do the 3 or 4 year project that was grammatical description and looking at evidentiality, and then I was going to bring that together with my interest in gesture. It took me like another 5 years after that to publish my first gesture paper on Shuba, but I still continue to bring those 2 topics together, which is super, super nice, getting to put all of my interests into one basket.
It's wonderful. So you found each other eventually, you and this language, through a series of unpredictable things, and that is academia in its finest form. It's just a matter of historical accidents that you found this language.
And I'm super grateful that Lakpa, who helped me meet the Yolmo speakers from Lamjung, I'm just grateful that his dad used to walk through those villages with him, and he knew these people from when they were children together, and he has this rapacious memory for people and where they are and what they speak. And so again, just like one of those brilliant happenstances that made everything come together really nicely. Every time I've won the lottery I had several postdocs, and then I've ended up in a tenured role at La Trobe. Again, that all just is like luck and good circumstance and good timing beyond anything that you can actually plan for.
Very true, very true. But you're also at the heart of this story. It can't just be luck. It's, your willingness to put yourself out there, your enthusiasm, which is evident for everyone to hear. Clearly, Yolmo, the languages of Nepal, they have played a big part in your life. They matter to you very dearly. Do they often make appearances in audio form on Lingthusiasm, or do you keep them to yourself?
I try not to bring up Yolmo in every single episode of Lingthusiasm, because I could have something to say about any of these languages, but I do. Yolmo and Shuba come up from time to time. Again, I kind of it's very sneaky of me, but I trade off the fact that it sounds like I'm talking about two separate languages if I talk about Yolmo or if I talk about Shuba. But they do come up from time to time. Same with Nepali, same with Polish, same with Auslan, languages that I've learnt and have a great deal of love for. I do try to not make every episode just a best of Polish and Nepali and Yolmo, because I could, but I also do like learning about other languages as well.
It's true, but it's absolutely fine to have your favorites, to have your few darlings as well. I've made my biases very clear on this podcast, but yes, listeners to this conversation who also know you from Lingthusiasm might not have quite appreciated how much you are restraining yourself with the topics you discuss.
Every time, every topic, for sure.
Okay, so in that previous section, you alluded to something about the language that you like in particular. That's what this whole third section is all about. So please expand on that for us. What is something that you really like about Yolmo?
I really like that Yolmo is a language that has grammatical structures that tell you the source of someone's information. And these grammatical structures are known as evidentiality. It's a feature of language that crops up in 25% of the world's languages, but because those languages are small, non-written oral languages of the Tibeto-Burman area, or Amazonia has a lot of evidential languages, or languages of North America, we don't really think about the fact that, almost a quarter of the world's languages have some grammatical form to tell you source of information. So in Yolmo and many Tibetic languages, this is all about the choice of the verb that in English we have as is. Is, and all the conjugations, and copulars in general, existentials in general. They're messy in English. We have is, am, are, were, be. They're messy in lots of languages. Tends to be one that is a bit idiosyncratic and you just have to memorize. In Yolmo, you have to choose between 3 different forms. One is yimba or yin, depending on the dialect. That's something that you know from personal experience and have known for a long time. So before, when I said, my name is Lauren, ngai min Lauren yimba, I just know that because it's something I've always known. It's something personal to me. Australia la te yimba. I am living in Australia. Again, I don't need any evidence for that. It's something I've known for a while. I can use a different form of the verb, which is do or duk, depending on the variety. That is for information that I have sensory experience of. I always think of it as the difference between if I were showing you a coffee shop and I said, this coffee shop has good coffee, I would use yimba. From personal experience, I go there all the time, it has good coffee. Whereas if I were at a new coffee shop and I ordered a coffee and I had a sip and it was good coffee, I would say, di coffee yabudu. This coffee is good. And I know from the immediate present sensory experience of tasting that coffee. You can use an emphatic form, which is duba. And because it's like, oh, I can really taste that this coffee is good, or oh, I can really see that something is happening, that comes with an extra added little flavor of like surprise. I didn't expect this coffee to be good. I'm at a side of the highway convenience store. I expected this coffee to be terrible and I'm pleasantly surprised, as one variation. And then you also have a third form in Yolmo, which is yindo, which is less about source of evidence and more about how certain you are. So be like, yeah, I think that place has good coffee. In English, you'd have to say something like, I think. In Yolmo, you can just use a different form of the verb, which is yindo, which is like, maybe it has good coffee. I can't say for certain. And then you have, separate to the verbs, but you have a separate form you can use at the end of a sentence, lo, which is for something that you don't know from personal experience, but someone has said. So if I said, oh, the coffee there is good, lo, it's like, look, don't take my word for it, but someone told me that it's good. There's been a lot of debate about whether this form can be used to tell people that like you're borrowing someone else's authority, or whether you're using it to like distance yourself from the claim that the coffee is good. So yeah, between those three different verb forms and all their little extra nuances, and then the reported form, I wrote my whole PhD dissertation on these evidential structures and particularly how they interact with questions and reported speech, because in both of those, you're looking at like multiple knowledge perspectives from multiple people in the conversation. And essentially, one thing that's really nifty about evidentials is you can use them to track knowledge states across a conversation and between people in a way that might not always be so obvious if you're a speaker of a language that doesn't use evidentials.
Understood. And I really appreciate that you made the connections and you made comparisons with English there, because this is something that, as you say, English is capable of, but we're using different means. We're conveying the same information with other structures. Coming from English, how did you find learning this aspect of the language, getting to grips with evidentiality?
I think the problem has been unlearning it. And now when people tell me a story, I'm just like, were you there? Did someone tell you this? I think once you have this as part of your narrative toolkit, it's actually hard to step away from it as a resource. And I think that's, obviously it was hard to pin down exactly what is happening. And like across the Tibetic languages, there's this very long and ongoing and like really nuanced and distinct debate around what counts as personal knowledge. And in some languages, that seems really restricted to only things about yourself and your inner sensation. Whereas in other languages like Yolmo, it's a little bit more relaxed. It's just stuff you know. And so there's all this subtlety and nuance and variation across languages that meant that I was happy to write 80,000 words and still ponder this topic a lot today.
Well, when linguists of the future, say 100 years' time, are studying Australian English and they start to see around this period a strange incursion of Tibeto-Burman style evidentiality into Australian English, we'll know who's to blame.
My kingdom for a reported speech marker. It would make things a lot easier.
You have the power. You have the power to start using it. It'll pick up. Third and final question from me remains the same. I would like to know, what is your parting point when it comes to the Yolmo language? What is something that you want listeners now to go out into the world knowing about this language of the Himalayas?
Trying to put it into one thought. And I think if there's one thought that I have, it's that thinking back to these villages of people who were very happily living their lives in Lamjung, speaking Yolmo, leading their own rich lives as multilingual speakers of a Tibeto-Burman language and an Indo-Aryan language, living among speakers of many languages with different cultural practices. It was a very good introduction to doing language documentation work because it reminded me that resources like glottolog and ethnologue are just the map, they're not the territory, and that the human linguistic experience is always so much more rich and so much more diverse. And the only way that we know that is to spend time and ask people very graciously to give their time to sharing their language and their experiences with us. And I think that there's so much more to learn and there's so much more nuance that we can hold and be enriched by.
That's a very, very lovely point. Yes, linguistics, a whole PhD can't even scratch the surface. Yeah, so rich.
Absolutely just beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely, lovely point to end this conversation on, this introduction to Yolmo. Lauren, that was absolutely super. If I may, if people listening would like to learn more about this language and also to learn more from you personally, where on the good internet would you direct them to?
If you use your search engine of choice and look up Lauren Gawne Latrobe, you'll find my work profile that has all my research publications. I also blog and social media as Superlinguo, but you can also find me talking all things linguistic on Lingthusiasm, a podcast that's enthusiastic about linguistics with my co-host Gretchen McCulloch at lingthusiasm.com.
As soon as you said that, I felt, I mean, that is the tagline for the show, and I felt like I was in the episode all of a sudden. I was transported by your voice. Dr. Lauren Gawne, everyone, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Danny.
Well, I do hope that you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Lauren Gawne. Now, to end this episode, I actually don't have a final fun fact this time, as I'd like to use this space instead to reflect on this second series of A Language I Love Is, and give thanks to the people who made it possible. Of course, I must give my heartfelt thanks to this season's guests: Jeremy, Leonid, Benjamin, Samapriya, Kate, Alba, Joey, Emma, Manish, Daria, Joyn, Katerina, Daniel, Colin, and Lauren. Without them, their enthusiasm, and their help, this series simply would not exist. It was a pleasure to talk to each of them, without exception. I'd also like to express my gratitude to Jeremiah McPadden, who came on board the Language I Love Is team during this series to provide technical support, but also enthusiasm for the whole show that has really kept me going. Yet, beyond these 16 specific individuals, I also want to thank every single person who has engaged with the show over the past year. Every listen, every share, every comment, every like on the social media platform of your choice, every email of encouragement is hugely appreciated, and it makes me feel a little bit less like a solitary obsessive flinging audio out into the internet. Thank you all. Now, as for a third series, well, I'm keen if you are. My recent change in career, from stressed PhD student to stressed radio broadcaster, has placed serious restrictions on the amount of time and brain power that I can dedicate to the podcast. But, nonetheless, it will be possible. The number of people who have already volunteered to do episodes is also a great motivation, and frankly should make the process a lot easier. So, it's au revoir for the moment. I'll be back in the new year with some more interviews with brilliant linguists about brilliant languages. In the meantime, dear listener, keep well and keep loving language.